Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Tampa Museum of Art. My name is Brittny Bevel, and I'm the Education Curator here at the museum. If you joined us yesterday for our live tour, we explored some of the galleries featuring the permanent collection here at the museum. Today, we're going to focus in on one specific exhibition. This month, the month of March, is Women's History Month, and tomorrow is International Women's Day. So today we're going to focus in on the exhibition HerStory, Stories of Ancient Heroines and Everyday Women. This tour is brought to you in partnership with the Gasparilla Festival of the Arts, presented today on Sunday, March 7th. And I am so excited to have this opportunity to share this exhibition with you. If you have questions, please don't hesitate to submit those via the chat in YouTube. My colleague Cassandra Abel is monitoring that chat and will be answering those questions as we go along, as well as feeding them to me so that I can answer them live for our future viewers. So with that being said, we're going to dive into the material. This tour will take about half an hour, but again, please don't hesitate to ask any questions or concerns. And as I switch my screen, please forgive my hand. All right, so this gallery space in the museum is dedicated to the exhibition HerStory, Stories of Ancient Heroines and Everyday Women. It's divided up into 4 sections where we look at everyday women in the ancient world. We then take an opportunity to look at the ways in which women are remembered. We focus in on the myths, the goddesses, and the stories that are told of mythological women. And then we take a look at the role contemporary art has in perpetuating the stories of these ancient women. So we're going to start over here, back at the everyday women, and the case that is probably the favorite of all of my colleagues here at the museum. So this case features objects that were used by women that help us learn a little bit more about their everyday lives. So one of my favorite pieces here is this object in the bottom left corner. This is a mirror from the Etruscan era. It is dated circa 350 BC, and you're actually looking at the back side of the mirror. So the reflective side would have been the side that we can't see, although with my gimbal, you can see it a little bit better than you can in the galleries. And this mirror, the reflective side would have been made out of a bronze alloy instead of glass. So highly polishable, slight yellow tinge to it would have allowed women to see their reflection in the object. Just behind it is another mirror and mirror cover. However, the object that is most other people's favorite in this case are these rings and this necklace. These are from the 4th century BC. They are made out of gold, and this is as close as I can get to them with my gimbal and phone. So they are made out of gold. The necklace does include some glass beads and an agate, and both the earrings and the necklace feature a Cupid figure. These are definitely ones that are worth coming to the museum to see in person, as the delicate, intricate gold work that is happening here is really quite impressive and really amazing to look at. The other objects I want to highlight in this case are in this bottom right corner. This is a set of 5 different fibulae, all in different shapes and sizes. And a fibulae is the ancestor of our modern day safety pin. So if you look at this one in the bottom corner, better view over here actually. Okay. So if you look at the one on the far right, you can see it's got that little coil on the end facing us, and the pin is resting in a bed, very much in the same way that the safety pins we all use today would have worked. And here is a little diagram to help you understand how these fibulae may have been used. Clothing in the ancient world, oftentimes in ancient Greece, I should say, oftentimes was created out of a single large sheet of fabric, using these fibulae at the shoulders to attach it and create sleeves or shoulder straps. and then a belt around the waist to fasten it and create a waistline. The other object used by women that I find really fascinating and fun to look at is this ancient baby feeder. This one is Greek. We do have another one on view in the other gallery that's Etruscan. And one of the primary roles women had in the ancient world was child care. There were a series of rooms set aside for women within the ancient Greek home, and they, in those rooms, would weave, raise children, as well as manage the household. So this is an ancient baby feeder, kind of a precursor to our sippy cup. You would pour the milk or whatever you're feeding the baby in that top hole, and then the little spout to the left is what the baby would drink out of. It is made out of ceramic, which gives it a little weight. So this is why we believe it's more like a sippy cup than a baby bottle. But it's a really interesting object, and you can find examples of baby feeders with a similar shape and style from as late as the early 1900s. So this is a style that stuck around for quite some time. This case is all about women in sports, and we talk a lot about sports with the ancient Greeks, primarily with the ancient Olympics. The Olympics were part of the Hellenic Games. There were 4 different Pan-Hellenic games, so all of Greek games. And however, women weren't allowed to compete in those games. There's one exception. If a woman happened to own horses, she could win the chariot race, because the winner of the chariot race is the person who owned the horses, not the driver driving the chariot. And there are historical records of a woman who did, in fact, win the chariot race at the Olympics. So when we look at sports in the ancient world as relates to women, in a couple of cases, we're looking at goddesses and myth. So back here, we have the goddess of war and wisdom, Athena. So you can see her featured in small silhouette down here as well, but the larger one has a little bit more detail to it. And this is a vase from the games at Athens. So not part of the Pan-Hellenic games, but the Pan-Athenaic, so all of Athens games. And this is a souvenir that somebody might have purchased when they went to the game. The reverse side shows a man riding on a horse. So this is specific to the horse racing events. But Athena is a favorite goddess amongst those of us here at the museum. So we'll see her a couple more times as we venture into the side more specifically related to myth. The other goddess we have in this case is Nike, Nike. There's a couple different ways to pronounce it. But this is the goddess, the Greek goddess of victory. If you're talking about Rome, her name would be Victoria. And in a couple different cases, especially in Athens with Athena, we often have iterations of Athena as Athena Nike, so the goddess of victory as well. So Nike and Athena go hand in hand, but the goddess of victory is the one who grants victory to the winner at the games. The 2 objects in the middle here are probably the most interesting for us when it comes to women in sports. This one in the front, this is a red figure squat lekathos. Red figure means that the background is painted black and the figures and designs are left the red color of the clay. But you can see this woman in the front here in the hand on our right, she seems to be holding a ball. Well, in her left hand, she is holding a fillet or a ribbon of victory, and there is a male athlete standing on the left. He's holding a strigil and an areobolus, which are symbols related to the, or equipment pieces related to the male athletes. That's how we recognize him as such. So there is one interpretation that this woman is granting victory to this male athlete with that ribbon in her hand. But with this other hand holding a ball, we were curious to see what kind of athletic competitions women participated in. And there are some stories of a ball game specific to women. It's gonna be a little hard to see, but the figure right behind it, this black figure, Lekathos is just an oil vessel, it's a specific shape. She also seems to be dropping a ball with her hand that is on the left. So we're very curious to learn more about this. We don't have specific answers, but these are really cool objects that kind of help tell the story of how women were perceived in the ancient world. We do have some very specific names in our collection that we recognize and can discuss. This here is a fragmentary head from a larger full body sculpture, and it is most likely the head of a Ptolemaic queen. The Ptolemaic dynasty in Egypt were started when Alexander the Great came into Egypt and left one of his generals, Ptolemy, behind, and his family then ruled in Egypt for quite some time. We have attributed this to the head of Arsinoe II, who was married to Ptolemy II. However, a recent Egyptian scholar has told us that due to the age in her face, she looks quite young. He would probably not attribute this to Arsinoe, but if you want to learn more about that, check out the museum's YouTube site. We have a whole lecture talking about the Ptolemaic dynasty and who this woman might in fact be. There's a couple, she also could have been interpreted as a goddess, goddess of love and beauty. You can see there's a little braid in her hair that suggests royalty or divinity. So there's a lot of these objects are still open to interpretation. One of the favorites of school children and adults alike is our anthropoid coffin of Shesep Amun Tayes Carrot, and I promise I am not pronouncing that correctly, but that's how I read it when I read the label, so I'm gonna stick with it for now. And this is a painted wood coffin that would have at one point in time held a mummy. So you can see there are some areas where the paint is chipping away that lets us see the underlying wood. There's also a couple of areas where she's undergone some conservation, like this blank patch of white here. That would be a space where, in an attempt to keep more of the paint from chipping off, a conservator has filled it in to allow for preservation of the artwork as in its current state. The front part of this sarcophagus features a large number of hieroglyphics that have been interpreted as being an excerpt from the Egyptian Book of the Dead. And there's a couple of scenes that are super legible to even those of us who don't read hieroglyphics. You have two gods here standing underneath a scale. The jackal-headed god is Anubis. The hawk-headed god is Horus. And on the right side or left side of the scale, they are weighing the deceased's heart against the feather of truth on the right. And the theory is that if the heart is lighter than the feather, she gets to go on to the afterlife. If it is weighed down by bad deeds and thus heavier than the feather of truth, she's doomed to walk the earthly plane. There's quite a number of gods that are recognizable on here, but this one being quite prominent, I like to point out. This is the goddess Nut, and we know that's who she is because of those little hieroglyphics that are in the crown above her head. That big circle above her head has three little hieroglyphics that allow us to understand that this is the goddess Nut, goddess of the sky. However, my favorite part about this sarcophagus and the way it's currently installed is the mirror that's behind it that allows us to see the painting on the underside. Many times when these coffins are installed, they are laying down on that side, so we don't get to see that they are painted on all sides of the piece. And it's believed that this is a portrait of the girl who was buried in the coffin. Now, because we have her standing up, that means we don't get to see the painting that is underneath her feet. It is, in fact, a painting of a cow with a coffin on its back. Probably Google it and find a number of examples. But the other interesting thing I find about the hieroglyphs on the front of the coffin is that when you get to her feet, there are some that appear to be upside down to us. They all of a sudden switch orientation. And that's because those are for her to read. So if she were to look down at her feet, she would be able to read that text. There's another object related to burial and remembrance in our collection that we have a little bit of information about the woman who was buried in it, thanks to writing. So this is an Etruscan cinerary urn. So it would have held cremated ashes instead of a full body. It is made out of ceramic, and it is a very specific type of Etruscan cinerary urn. You can find examples that look almost exactly like this in museum collections around the world, where the box features a battle scene and the lid features a somewhat stylized reclining version of the deceased, whether male or female. It doesn't matter. They often just have this bottom box of a battle and then the reclining figure on top. So here we have a female, and just underneath the lid, there's some little red markings that we luckily have reproduced on our label, as well as translated in our label, because if you're anything like me, you don't read ancient Etruscan. This text does identify the woman as Larthe Caliune, the wife of Vesa. And as Cassandra and I were putting together this exhibition, one of the things that really struck us is oftentimes all that we know about a person are the words that are left behind in memorial of them. Women played a large role in remembrance for the deceased. So here you have a white ground lekythos. Again, lekythos just means oil vessel, where you have a man and a woman leaving behind offerings. And the woman is actually holding a version of the lekythos she's painted on. So it's quite meta. You have the lekythos painted on the lekythos itself. And so these images like this, the words that are left behind of these women, are some of the things that really intrigued us about what we know about them. So when you do come visit the Tampa Museum of Art and take a look at this exhibition, there are 2 quotes on the wall. Those are epitaphs that were left behind in honor of women, to give you a sense of some of the words that family members wanted their women to be remembered by. All right, we're going to move into the mythological portion of our tour today. We have a significant number of vases on view that feature goddesses. 2 in particular are very heavily represented in our permanent collection. The goddess Athena, we've already mentioned her, but goddess of war and wisdom, we have quite a few objects related to her and her role in histories or in mythology. So this vase here, you have Athena in the center. It is a black figure vase. With black figure vases, if you see a figure painted in white, as well as other figures painted in black, the figure in white is a woman. The figures in black are men. These 3 figures are highly identifiable by certain characteristics. So you have a woman with a full-length clothing garment on, as well as carrying a shield and this very ornate helmet. Let's see if I can get a little bit better view of their heads. That tells us that she is Athena. The figure next to her has a very specific cloak wrapped around him. It's not as obvious as it is in one of the other pieces we're going to see him in, but he's holding a club that kind of looks like a baseball bat with waddly edges. This is indicative of the hero Hercules, or Heracles as the Greeks knew him. And then the figure to the right of Athena has a very particular hat on. And if you look down at his shins, there's little curly cues coming out of his sandals. Those are wings. So this is the winged god Hermes, or Mercury to the Romans, but we're looking at a Greek base, so we're gonna go with Hermes. And so with Athena and Hermes and Hercules, it's possible that this object is related to the apotheosis of Hercules. So Athena is here to escort her half-brother up to Mount Olympus, where he'll be deified. So there, some of the roles she played in the stories of different heroes. Athena is often represented by an owl. So we have an owl cup here that looks very similar to the owl that is represented on the coin on the right. These are in fact two sides of the same coin, where the one on the left features the head of Athena and the other side features the owl with the first three letters of the words Athens or Athena. Athena is the patron goddess of Athens. And then we have a vase where Athena is in battle. There's a couple different ways to interpret this vase. There's a couple different stories that include a battle with Athena. So it's possible that she is battling a giant. It's also possible that she's battling Ajax the Lesser. I'm not going to dive too deep into those myths because I don't know them off the top of my head, but with little identification for the figure she's battling, we have to resort to looking at the stories we know where she did battle with a man. He's painted black, so we know he's a man, but there's several of them. We also have a Roman marble head of the goddess of war and wisdom. Because this one is Roman, we would call her Minerva. And then before I dive into the other goddesses, I also want to talk about the role that some mortal women play in our myths that we have from ancient Greece. So this vase features on this side the story of the birth of Dionysus, god of wine. And we can see the baby Dionysus down at the bottom here. He's about to be whisked away by Hermes for safekeeping. But above Dionysus, we see the story of his birth, and we have his mother, Semele, who actually suffered a pretty terrible fate. She was tricked by Hera, the queen of the gods, into asking her lover to reveal himself in all his glory. Unfortunately, that lover was Zeus, and you can see Zeus represented, forgive my finger as I point this out, by this ribbon of bright light above her head. And unfortunately for mortals, being in the presence of a god in their true form is fatal. So Semele actually died from this encounter, and the baby Dionysus was still in utero. And so Zeus, in order to save his son, took the baby and stitched him into his thigh so that he could finish growing up. And so the baby Dionysus was also eventually born from his father's thigh as well as from his mother's stomach. But mortal women often play a role in Greek mythology that is not always happy. Very little of Greek mythology seems to end in a happy ending. Some of the other goddesses we have on view are featured in this case. I'm going to let you come visit and explore this because we still have one more section to view, and I've got about 5 minutes left on my self-imposed half-hour time limit. So this case features objects related to Nike, Persephone, Demeter, Artemis, Athena, Hera, and Aphrodite. Speaking of Aphrodite, she would be the other figure that we have quite a few objects related to, including these 4 sculptures. The 3 on the outside are all Roman. So you have 2 Roman bronzes on the left and an alabaster carved sculpture on the right. And in the center, we have a statuette from the Etruscans of their goddess of love and beauty. Her name is Turon. And an interesting thing about Turon is her role as goddess of love and beauty is slightly different than the one that Aphrodite and Venus played in the Greek and Roman cultures. Here you see Turon holding a dove in one hand and a pomegranate in the other. We don't often see Aphrodite or Venus with a pomegranate. It's more likely that she would be holding an apple, such as this little sculpture in the front here, which relates to a very specific story from Greek mythology and the Judgment of Paris. But here you have Turon with her pomegranate. And if you think about the interior of a pomegranate with all of its bright little seeds, it's often a symbol of fertility and life. And so here you have the goddess of love and beauty with some symbolism related to fertility and life giving. We find this particularly interesting with the final section, in connection with the final section of our exhibition. This is our Roman marble bronze from the 1st century AD, or Roman marble statue of copy of a Greek statue. Sorry, I think I said the word bronze in there. This fragmentary torso obviously is missing her head, her arms, and her legs. A few years ago, we invited New York-based artist Patricia Cronin to come and select a work of art from our collection to be inspired by, and she ultimately chose this fragmentary torso to be the inspiration for her monumental 10-foot tall statue of Aphrodite reimagined. And in this sculpture, you can see Patricia Cronin has given Aphrodite back her head, her arms, and her legs. However, she has made it very obvious which items are original to the fragmentary sculpture that she based this object on, with the different colored materials. So the body of the statue is made out of cold cast marble. The arms, the legs, and the head are made out of resin. And that resin is dyed a kind of seafoam green blue color to be reminiscent of sea glass, a nod to the birth of Aphrodite from the sea. But when Patricia was putting together her Aphrodite, she was looking at the aspects of the goddess that she found really interesting. So one of those is the role she played in the sea, and her connection to the sea. Patricia being from New York City, they are impacted by hurricanes, much in the same way that Florida is. So really thinking about the goddess as a protective figure. And then she also gave the goddess a pomegranate, thinking about all of those different iterations of the goddess of love and beauty and all the different ways different people worshiped her. And one thing that Patricia Cronin said about her artwork when she was here visiting is that she really enjoys giving presence to absence. So when you think about her pieces, she's bringing to light stories that have gone untold. And so that was one of the things Cassandra and I were really interested in exploring as we put together this exhibition, is what stories are being told about women through the intervention, modern day women, through the intervention of ancient Greek and Roman art. Before we move away from Patricia Cronin's piece to the final section of this exhibition, we do also have a painting on view where the artist has purposefully obscured some of the body of the figure. You see a hint at our torso of Aphrodite in the background, but it's overlaid with this sheer fabric that continues to manipulate a little bit our vision of the actual body. So we don't have the opportunity to see the entirety of the body. I'm gonna come back around here and show you one more vase related to our friend Hercules that I mentioned early on. And he is super easily recognized. If you remember that club from the vase I showed you a moment ago, you can see it again in the figure on the left here, above, raised above his head. And then you also have his lion skin hood. So you can see wrapped around his head. If I can get a good view without glare from the lights above, there we go. You can see wrapped around his head, it looks like there's a lion eating him from behind. It's tied around his shoulders and drapes all the way down around his waist. Those make it very obvious that we are looking at the hero Hercules or Heracles. But here he's doing battle with two women. They're painted white, we know they're women. Most likely this is him battling the Amazons. And this would be related to his 9th labor, where Hercules had to retrieve the belt of the queen of the Amazons, Hippolyta. I love this as a segue into an Amazon from contemporary culture, William Moulton Marston's Wonder Woman. So with the reinvigorated interest in Wonder Woman right now, we had this great opportunity to look at the ways in which myths from the past are helping tell stories of women from the present. And Marston created his Wonder Woman to represent strength and to fight for women's rights. And he actually wrote that the only hope for civilization is the greater freedom, development, and equality of women in all facets of human activity. And so this is an opportunity to really look at the ways in which history has impacted our contemporary culture. At that, it has been half an hour. I'm going to step out of the way of our other visitors to allow them the opportunity to look in our gallery space. However, I am here to answer questions should any have popped up during the YouTube live feed. Otherwise, please come visit the Tampa Museum of Art. We are located in downtown Tampa on the Curtis Hickson Waterfront Park and along the Hillsborough River. The museum is open 7 days a week, 10 to 5, with the exception of Thursday when we are open until 8 p.m. Come visit us. We really look forward to seeing you in our galleries. Our website is tampamuseum.org. Find more information about how to visit there, as well as our COVID precautions at the moment. And with that, I would also like to thank the Casperilla Festival of the Arts for letting us participate through these virtual programs. Cassandra and I have had a lot of fun presenting those the last 2 days. If you missed the art making opportunities, you can go find those on our YouTube. You can also find more information about the other exhibitions in our permanent collection from the video I did yesterday with a tour of our permanent collection galleries. So everybody, thank you so much for sticking with me when I went a little over my self-imposed half-hour time limit. And I look forward to seeing you in the museum in the near future. Thanks, everybody.